Hi, welcome. I am grateful to you for joining in on this journey through this particularly complex time in our history and experience. There seems to be so much to distract us right now in the public realm that it often feels terribly unsettled, unfocused, somewhat haphazard, and unsure. I hope within this somewhat uncomfortable context, this past holiday weekend gave you an opportunity to rest, to reflect, perhaps to spend some time with family or friends, or read a good book. Before proceeding further, let us take our first break to breathe. Let us either find our comfortable positions for meditating, or let us take them at ease, but still attentive, relaxed, but still alert and aware of our bodies, our breathing, our focus. I heard a lovely image this week that may be helpful to you in finding your meditative position or your optimal meditative position. A meditation leader suggested that we think of our spines as if they are Jacob's ladder, as depicted in his dream, firmly planted on the earth, but reaching for the heavens. Clearly, the instructor was a rabbi. If that makes you extend your back to the point of tension, this might not be the best image for you. But if it is helpful, please be my guest. In addition, where I often suggest we release any number of points of tension in our bodies, this instructor suggested that we soften those same places. So whatever language works the best for you, please feel free, use it, experiment with it. So let us begin by taking inventory. And as we do so, we may want to close our eyes or soften our gaze toward nothing specific in the distance. So we could certainly soften from the tops of our heads, even as they reach upwards, gently reach upwards, and soften our foreheads. Oh, certainly, so much tension gathers there. Our jaws. I think I need to release my jaw, not just soften it. In our ears, just the concept of letting them go or letting them soften. Our necks, let's just let them fall and roll and creak a bit as we roll. But it feels good to find those places and soften them, release them. Our shoulders. Oh, that's a release. Our elbows could be more of a soften. Our wrists, we can gently twirl them and let our hands again rest softly, gently in our laps, palms upturned. And within our bodies, our tongues, our throats, our chests that we will expand in just a moment with our first breath, our tummies. Let us soften all the muscles around our internal organs that I think we abuse them in many ways, but certainly by holding on too tightly. In the area of our waists and hips and thighs, our knees. Let us soften our lower legs or release them or flap them a bit and twirl one ankle and then perhaps the other. And perhaps wiggle our toes or dig them in as if we are at the beach And then let us breathe. Just take that good, deep, healing breath. And try to find all the places we've just released inside. And fill them. Fill them with this breath of life. This sustaining miracle of our every minute, our every second. Let's hold on to it for as long as we can. Maybe even take a small additional breath to fill up, to feel what real fullness is. And then when ready, we can release. And let me repeat, as an idea from last time, you are not to gauge yourselves on my rhythm. If you do it 5 times in the space of my talking about one breath, that's probably normal and healthy. But we fill up again, thinking just about that breath. Feeling our bodies, perhaps feeling the whole extension of our spines from the ground to the heavens above. We allow that breath just to come in and to find its own way, certainly into our lungs, our tummies, along all the veins and arteries. And then we let it go with as much gratitude as we breathe in. This is the focus. It removes us from the noise. It allows us to be centered, be attentive to what is going on right now, and to notice if we are feeling angry or anxious, if we're feeling joyful, happy, content, aggrieved, even a combination of things. We can notice them, but because we are training ourselves to breathe in this moment, we are simultaneously training ourselves to take a beat, not to react always to our immediate impulses, but to look at them, to focus, to determine their source, sometimes to let them go, sometimes to just by bringing an awareness to them, we can rob them of their power. That's what this exercise does, this practice does. It puts us in control of this moment. I am not proud to confess that for the first time in my life, I had difficulty this year with the 4th of July. Despite my protestations that we can't give up and we have to have hope, which I believe completely. Nevertheless, I am simultaneously a bit grumpy. I'm angry, I'm horrified, and I'm scared by too much that is happening in our country. I hope I am overreacting. I hope I am completely misguided in my fears. It troubles me that I have very little understanding of points of view that are opposed to mine. And if given the opportunity to discuss any current issue in our country with someone of an opposing viewpoint, I would not be able to do so with patience, tolerance, and a true listening ear. Interestingly, the Torah portions we are currently studying in the book of Numbers focus on the question, how do we live together? As well as questions of loss, leadership, grief, anger, sustenance, water, law, and death. In last week's portion, entitled Korach, we learned of a serious threat to Moses' leadership from a rather large group of Israelites, followers of a creditable threat, a man by the name of Korach. Korach accuses Moses of monopolizing and thereby abusing his power. This is the way the Torah records Korach's challenge. Now Korach, the son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Datan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab and On. This is their family tree that gives them legitimacy. These are known people. Took men. These Korach with two others took men, and they rose up in face of Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 men. They were princes of the congregation, the elect men of the assembly, men of renown. This was not just riffraff. These were respected members of the community. And they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, "Ye take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Wherefore then lift ye up yourselves above the assembly of the Lord." This has the effect of throwing Moses into absolute despair, because he knows that he hasn't taken anything upon himself at all. He is there because God chose him against his will and against his every inclination. At its face value, however, the accusation against him doesn't seem to be so unreasonable. And the rabbis go to great pains to figure out why Korach is so evil that God actually has the ground swallow him up with all of his followers, a group that ultimately numbers something around 15,000, according to the Torah. Our sages ultimately come to discern what is going on here in one of their most famous formulations. This is it. Any dispute for the sake of heaven will have enduring value. But every dispute not for the sake of heaven will not have enduring value. What is an example of a dispute for the sake of heaven? The dispute between Hillel and Shammai. These were two schools of thought that often came at decisions about issues from two very different ways. One, the more liberal, which is Hillel, and one, the more conservative, which was Shammai. What is an example of one not for the sake of heaven? The dispute of Korach and all his company. I quote from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. The rabbis did not conclude from the Korach rebellion that argument is wrong, that leaders are entitled to unquestioning obedience, that the supreme value in Judaism should be, as it is in some faiths, submission. To the contrary, Argument is the lifeblood of Judaism, so long as it is rightly motivated and essentially constructive in its aims. Judaism is a unique phenomenon, a civilization all of whose canonical texts are anthologies of argument. In Tanakh, in Bible, the heroes of faith, Abraham, Moses, Jeremiah, Job, they all argue with God. Midrash interpretation is founded on the premise that there are 70 faces, 70 legitimate interpretations of any part of the Torah. The Mishnah is largely constructed on the model of Rabbi X says this, Rabbi Y says that. The Talmud, far from resolving these arguments, usually deepens them considerably. Argument in Judaism is a holy activity, the ongoing internal dialogue of the Jewish people as it reflects on the terms of its destiny and the demands of its faith. What then made the argument of Korach and his co-conspirators different from that of the schools of Hillel and Shammai? One of our sages, Rabbeinu Yonah, offered a simple explanation. An argument for the sake of heaven is one that is about truth. An argument not for the sake of heaven is about power. The difference is immense. In a contest for power, if I lose, I lose. But if I win, I also lose, according to Rabbi Sachs, because in diminishing my opponents, I have diminished myself. If I argue for the sake of truth, then if I win, I win. But if I lose, I also win, because being defeated by the truth is the only defeat that is also a victory. I am enlarged. I learned something I did not know before. I find this explanation exceedingly helpful as I evaluate what is currently considered public discourse. For me, it speaks to the level of frustration and disappointment I have with so many public officials who have been entrusted with the public good, whom we expect to be honest, truthful, thoughtful, knowledgeable individuals who in context after context seem to care very little about the common good, the law, or the truth of a situation, but rather act to increase their power or influence or the predominance of a specific point of view. The way is as clear and as ancient as our tradition. Any dispute for the sake of heaven will have enduring value, but every dispute not for the sake of heaven will not have enduring value. It is certainly a good guide by which to gauge our own perceptions. This week's portion goes in another direction. It is in this portion entitled Chukat that Miriam dies, one of the leaders of our people in ancient times. The people of Israel are without water. Aaron dies, Moses' brother, Miriam is his sister. And Moses, because he loses his temper and strikes the rock in order to bring forth water rather than speak to it as God had instructed, is told that he will not live to enter the promised land. In just a few verses, the leadership that had been responsible for bringing the Israelites out of Egypt and leading them for 38 years in the desert dies off, or is given a clear indication that the end is certain and near. As something of an aside, there is a long association in our tradition of Miriam with water. She is the one, after all, who watches her brother Moses as he floats on the Nile as an infant. She leads the women in singing and dancing upon successfully crossing the Red Sea. And there is a legend that it is because of Miriam's righteousness that a well of water followed the Israelites throughout their wanderings in the wilderness, a well that dried up when she passed away. We might legitimately ask if the well actually dried up, or if the Israelites were so fearful without Miriam's loving presence that they imagined it had, that there was no one and nothing to nurture them or care for them. A fear of scarcity is a real fear, even when inflation is not at record highs and supply chains are working better than they currently seem to be. It occurs to me that at a time of change and fearfulness, the Israelites revert to their most immature, childish, slave-like mentality. I suspect we all recognize such behavior when all we want is for someone to take care of us and tell us all will be well. That was Miriam's job, according to our tradition's imagination. It must be the lucky few of our own time who have never awakened in the middle of the night, terrified that disaster is imminent, that we will lose everything and have nothing. This episode gives us a way of examining our own terrors through the lens, of fear, loss, and grief. There is one more lesson I believe in these chapters that may be helpful. The rabbis go to great lengths to try to understand why Moses' loss of temper, whereby instead of speaking to the rock as God had commanded him in order to bring forth water, in his rage, bereavement, and frustration, he strikes the rock twice. The rabbis throughout the centuries are deeply troubled by this final sentence of Moses, in which he is prevented from arriving at the place of all his strivings and the ultimate goal of his leadership. It seems far too cruel for God to deny him this final wish, a punishment that far exceeds the crime. There are many interpretations and many points of view as to why Moses is given this final punishment not to see the promised land, except from afar. There are many interpretations with no definitive answers. It occurred to me recently that it doesn't matter what God's reason was for keeping Moses out of the promised land. The reason is just a pretext, an excuse for something God never intended to do in the first place. Moses was never going to enter the promised land, not because of any grave error Moses had made, not because of any lack in him or his leadership, not because of any not because of any lapse of judgment or rash action, but in order to teach us that our journeys, not our destinations, are the sum and substance of our stories. If Moses cannot reach the promised land, that is to demonstrate that none of us as individuals will do so either. And that in no way diminishes our efforts or our goals. We strive to reach the full extent of our abilities, to give the very best that we possibly can, to reach heights that were not previously scaled, with the knowledge that our work will be unfinished but taken up, please God, by those who follow us. Perhaps this teaching gives us a frame in which to handle setbacks and disappointments, anger at current circumstances, and feelings of powerlessness. Perhaps it allows each of us to recalibrate our assumptions and even our feelings in the face of so much frustration and unfinished business, some of which we thought had been finished long ago. This human enterprise in which we are engaged, God knows how impossibly frustrating, angering, and difficult it is. God destroyed humanity once, according to our legends, and would have done so again, but for God's covenant with Noah, and later, the intercession of Moses. Every day, We have a choice to opt in or to opt out. I'm still opting in, but some days that's not so easy. So let us breathe. Let us concentrate on the reality of this moment so that when decisions do arrive, we can make them mindfully and intentionally, fully focused, not influenced by the intense, but passing emotions of the moment. Let us breathe and just be here, right now, aware of what might be bubbling up and being willing to notice and hopefully to let go of those feelings and return simply to our breathing, to our focus. And the next feeling that arises, let us notice it. We might even observe from where it is coming. But then let's set it aside for now. Let us see if we can set it aside for now and return. To finding that fullness, that intake, that healing sensation. Let us focus on that and then let it go. If we find our thoughts wandering, let us try to bring them back to the simple act of breathing in and breathing out. Because our thoughts will invariably take us elsewhere. Something that just happened, something that we hope will happen or anticipate will happen or fear might happen. But it doesn't allow us to be right here. So let us focus just on that breath coming in and going out. By way of conclusion, not surprisingly, I have turned to Mary Oliver for her poem, Invitation. Oh, do you have time to linger for just a little while out of your busy and very important day for the goldfinches that have gathered in a field of thistles for a musical battle to see who can sing the highest note or the lowest, or the most expressive of mirth, or the most tender. Their strong, blunt beaks drink the air as they strive melodiously, not for your sake, and not for mine, and not for the sake of winning, but for sheer delight and gratitude. Believe us, they say. It is a serious thing just to be alive on this fresh morning in the broken world. I beg of you, do not walk by without pausing to attend to this rather ridiculous performance. It could mean something. It could mean everything. It could be what Rilke meant when he wrote, "You must change your life." I wish you a good week and hope that you will apply the measure of, if it is an argument for the sake of heaven, it will endure. If it is an argument not for the sake of heaven, it will not endure. An argument for the sake of heaven is about truth. An argument not for the sake of heaven is about power. It's an important distinction. I wish you health and strength and interesting explorations. I look forward to seeing you next time. God bless.
You should be able to end the recording.
There we go. I had to go back to my screen. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Here we go.